I'd like to start with the existential risk category. And the idea that you're blind to risks is kind of funny just because you don't have as successful a career in entrepreneurship or venture capital or investing, what have you, without being very well aware of risks and how to mitigate them. And I mean, that shows in the way that you talk about it as a portfolio of existential risks. But and this makes sense to me that, okay, if we have AGI that could be very helpful in mitigating other existential risks like climate change or potential asteroid impacts that maybe human intelligence without augmentation can't solve. But then you have somebody like Eliezer Yudkowsky who says, and I don't know if I have the words correctly, but the default condition of the development of AGI is human extinction. And in that case, if that's your attitude, it's going to entirely outweigh any potential positive benefits that could come from AGI. And so before we move on from existential risks, I'm just curious where it is that you think you diverge from someone like Eliezer Yudkowsky, who really thinks that this is the default condition of the development of AGI.
Well, the argument, as I would kind of steel person it some before I respond, is kind of like, well, um, inevitably, if we continue on this path of AI, we will create a species of entities that has a higher cognitive capabilities than we do, and will be stronger across all of that, including its ability to manipulate the universe. It will have interests that are counter our continued participating survival. And the species that have the highest cognitive capability shape the planet just like we have, and shape life. And um, I think I think it's basically um, and then you kind of get to, well, what's the probability in each of these cases as well? I tend to think that that none of these things are high percentages. They're not 100% across it. They're the inevitable extinction. I think that uh, it has some emotional resonance because people say, well, we became the highest cognitive species and we wiped out everybody else that wasn't essentially a servant to us out of our nature and interest, and obviously not everything. There's birds, but it's kind of like all mammals of over a certain weight class in any place that we occupy, we tend to either only keep them around if they're like pets and foodstuffs and other kinds of things. Part of the reason why, by the way, seals are one of the most populous mammals because we don't really dominate the oceans that much. And you say that's the reason why for this sort of thing. Um, and the first is I don't think it's inevitable that we're creating a kind of either a godlike or a high cognitive species. I think if you look at it already, we already have super intelligent AI, but the progress we're on is a set of savants. A set of savants is very different than, kind of a new Terminator, kind of alien species. That's one. Two is, even if we create an amazing species, I don't think it's inevitable that that species is like, and now these little ants. There's all kinds of ways that that could play. One, what do we build and what do we shape? Do we build super intelligent species, etcetera? I don't think it's inevitable per se. And I'm kind of speaking in long time frames. Everyone else, like what Yukowsker tends to be, because it's people talk about within their lifetimes. It's important we start bombing the AI factories right now. Like okay, I think it's almost a self disproving argument in that vector. Then, so it isn't necessarily that it's inimical. Like you could, for example, if you said, well, the reason why we behave the way that we do because other animals is we're all competing for the same oxygen, calories, and land space. If you said, hey, I write a science fiction story, because these are all science fiction stories, and I say, well, what about me and silicon intelligence? And I say, well, what does silicon intelligence need? It needs space, but it needs like metals and it needs sunlight and energy. It was like, well, okay, there's a ton of that in the universe, and we need the oxygen and calories here. Can we do a trade? Can we collaborate? Can we create something that likes the fact that we helped create it and so forth? As ways of doing it. So like the inevitable enemy characteristic also strikes me as like just overly quick. And that's given a whole bunch of things already to get there. And then the final thing is I'm definitely more optimistic on what kinds of things we can create. So, like, for example, when I started thinking about, like, even the far-flung, science fiction, super intelligence kinds of AI, I don't mean science fiction as to mean that it's not never possible. I just mean that because, a lot of science fiction stuff does become possible in some point, not all of it, some of it. Um, but I mean that the question is like, well, okay, well, what kinds of intelligence might it be? Is it going to be like a human domineering intelligence? Or like I can easily just tell a bunch of stories like it loves solving math problems about the universe, or or can you in making it, can you trade it to be Buddhist? Or it says sentience good. And I like, human sentience as well. So that's part of the reason why like all of the kind of doomsaying strikes me as off. And by the way, off not just in terms of incorrect, but also off in terms of it's like it makes me feel very emotionally important to be, being the Cassandra and saying this stuff when actually the participation in the dialogue is much more useful to say, look, how do we shape this? Right? How do we navigate to what like what's like, for example, when I started thinking about this and started thinking about the risks, I said, well, what are the ways that if we were creating a super intelligence, um, that we could maximize the chance that it's this kind of pro sentience Buddhist kind of super intelligence? Because if it's that, that's great, right? So anyway, so it's just that's part of the reason why that like it's the look, are you gonna help try to shape this stuff? Um, that's my criticism of the critics.